The call came on a Tuesday morning. I was folding Mrs. Harrington's silk blouses in the laundry room when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. A man's voice, formal and careful, asked if I was Maria Elena Rodriguez. I said yes, my heart already racing. He introduced himself as Mr. Reynolds, Mrs. Eleanor Harrington's personal attorney. He said he needed to see me, alone, as soon as possible. I thought I was being fired, or worse, accused of something. I agreed to meet him the next day, my hands shaking as I hung up. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about everything I might have done wrong, every little mistake that could cost me this job, this life I'd built from nothing. I came to the United States 15 years ago with 2 suitcases and a pocket full of hope. I was 25, didn't speak English well, and had no family here. I worked everywhere, cleaning hotel rooms, washing dishes, babysitting for families who never learned my name. I was invisible, just another Latina immigrant doing the work no one else wanted to do. I sent money home every month to my mother and younger brother. I lived on rice and beans in a basement apartment that smelled like mildew, but I kept going. I had to. Then I found the agency. A woman at church told me about it, a service that placed housekeepers in wealthy homes. I went in for an interview wearing my only professional outfit, a navy blue dress from a thrift store. The woman at the agency asked if I had references. I didn't. She asked if I had experience in luxury homes. I lied and said yes. She sighed, made a phone call, and told me to come back the next day. When I did, she handed me an address in Greenwich, Connecticut, the Harrington estate. She said if I messed up, I'd never work through the agency again. I promised I wouldn't. The first time I saw the mansion, I thought it was a hotel. White columns, sprawling gardens, a fountain in the circular driveway. The head housekeeper, Mrs. Callahan, opened the service entrance. She told me the rules. Don't speak unless spoken to. Don't touch anything that doesn't need cleaning. And never bother the family. I followed her through hallways lined with oil paintings and marble floors. My first week, I barely saw any of the Harringtons. I cleaned guest rooms no one used, dusted bookshelves full of unread books, and polished silverware for dinners I'd never attend. I felt like a ghost. But then I met Mrs. Eleanor Harrington. She was 78 years old, a widow with silver hair always pulled back in a perfect bun, and eyes that seemed to see straight through you. One afternoon, she found me in the library, carefully wiping down a side table. She startled me. I apologized immediately, thinking I'd done something wrong, but she just smiled, a soft, tired smile, and asked if I'd bring her tea. I did. And when I returned with the tray, she asked me to sit. I hesitated. Mrs. Callahan's rules echoed in my head, but Mrs. Harrington insisted. So I sat on the edge of the chair, hands folded in my lap, barely breathing. She asked me where I was from. I told her. She asked about my family, my journey, my dreams. No one had asked me those things in years. I answered carefully, unsure if this was some kind of test. When I finished, she said something I'll never forget. She said, "You remind me of myself when I was young, hungry, determined, alone." That afternoon became a ritual. Every day at 3 o'clock, I'd bring Mrs. Harrington her tea and we'd talk. She told me about her life, how she'd married young to a man who built an empire but died too soon, leaving her to run it all by herself. She told me about the battles she fought to keep the business, the people who tried to take advantage of her, the loneliness that came with power. And I told her about my life too, little by little. She listened, really listened, not like the others, who looked through me like I was furniture. Mrs. Harrington saw me, and in that house full of people, she was the only one who did. The rest of the family was different. Andrew Harrington, Mrs. Eleanor's oldest son, was in his early 50s, tall, sharp-suited, and always in a hurry. He ran the family's real estate division and treated everyone like they were wasting his time. He never looked at me, not once. When he needed something, he'd bark orders at Mrs. Callahan, who'd pass them down to me like a game of telephone. His wife, Vanessa, was worse. She was obsessed with appearances, always dressed like she was about to attend a gala, even at breakfast. She'd walk through the house inspecting things, running her finger along surfaces, checking for dust. When she found some, she'd call Mrs. Callahan and complain, never directly to me. I didn't exist to her. Their 2 kids, Lucas and Isabel, were teenagers who spent most of their time on their phones or out with friends. I don't think they ever learned my name. To them, I was just the help. Then there was Margaret, Mrs. Eleanor's younger daughter. She was a lawyer, mid-40s, cold and calculating. She lived in Manhattan and only came to visit on holidays or when she needed something, usually money. I'd overhear arguments through closed doors, Margaret's voice sharp and accusing, Mrs. Eleanor's calm but firm. Margaret thought her mother was too generous, too trusting. She wanted control of the family fortune. So did Andrew. The 2 of them were constantly fighting, though they tried to hide it behind forced smiles and polite conversation. Mrs. Eleanor saw through it all. One evening, after Margaret left in a huff, Mrs. Eleanor sighed and said to me, "They only come when they need something. You're the only one who asks how my day was." I didn't know what to say, so I just poured her more tea and stayed a little longer. Things changed when Mrs. Eleanor got sick. It started with a cough she couldn't shake. Then she lost weight. By the time she saw a doctor, it was too late. Stage 4, cancer. 6 months, maybe less. The news hit the family like a bomb. Suddenly, Andrew was visiting every day. Margaret canceled meetings to fly in. Vanessa brought flowers and spoke in hushed tones. They were all so concerned, so devoted. It made me sick. I'd been there for years and they'd barely acknowledged Mrs. Eleanor. Now that she was dying, they couldn't stay away, Mrs. Eleanor saw through it too. She asked me to move into the room next to her so I could help her at night. I did. I stopped going home to my tiny apartment. I was with her around the clock, bringing her medication, helping her to the bathroom, sitting with her when the pain got too bad to sleep. The family didn't like it, Margaret especially. She'd show up unannounced, walk into Mrs. Eleanor's room, and find me there. She'd ask in that tight, fake polite voice if I could give them privacy. Mrs. Eleanor would tell her no, that I was staying. The look on Margaret's face was pure venom. One night, about a month before she died, Mrs. Eleanor called Mr. Reynolds to the house. He was her personal attorney, a serious man in his 60s who always carried a leather briefcase. They locked themselves in the study for hours. When he finally left, he looked grim. Mrs. Eleanor called me in. She was sitting in her chair by the window, wrapped in a blanket, looking so small and fragile. She told me to sit. I did. She took my hand and said, "I've made some changes to my will. They're not going to like it, but you deserve everything I'm giving you." I didn't understand. I started to say she didn't owe me anything, that I was just doing my job. But she squeezed my hand and said, "You gave me something they never did. You treated me like a person, not a bank account." I couldn't speak. I just held her hand and cried. 2 weeks later, Mrs. Eleanor passed away. It was early in the morning, just before sunrise. I was sitting beside her bed when she took her last breath. It was peaceful, quiet. I stayed with her for a while, holding her hand, whispering thank you over and over. When I finally called the family, Andrew arrived first, followed by Margaret and Vanessa. They cried, they hugged each other, they played the part of the grieving family perfectly. I stood in the corner, invisible again. The funeral was massive. Hundreds of people showed up. Most of them strangers, business associates, society friends who wanted to be seen. Andrew gave a speech about his mother's legacy, how she inspired him, how much he'd miss her. Margaret read a poem with tears streaming down her face. Vanessa wore all black and sobbed into a lace handkerchief. I sat in the back row in my black dress from the thrift store and watched the whole performance. Afterward, people came up to me and asked who I was. I told them I worked for Mrs. Harrington. They nodded politely and moved on. If you've been watching this far, I need to ask you something. Have you ever felt invisible? Like no matter how hard you worked, no one really saw you? Drop the word "seen" in the comments if you have. And if you're new here, please subscribe. Because what happens next, you won't believe. A week after the funeral, I got the call from Mr. Reynolds. He asked me to come to his office, alone. He wouldn't tell me why over the phone. I was terrified. I thought the family had convinced him I'd stolen something, or that they were accusing me of manipulating Mrs. Eleanor. I almost didn't go, but I had to know. His office was in a sleek building in downtown Greenwich, all glass and steel. The receptionist led me to a conference room where Mr. Reynolds was waiting with a thick folder. He gestured for me to sit. I did, my hands shaking. He opened the folder and said, "Ms. Rodriguez, I'm here to read you a portion of Mrs. Harrington's last will and testament." My stomach dropped. He started reading. The main residence, the Harrington estate in Greenwich, Connecticut, to Maria Elena Rodriguez. I blinked. I must have heard him wrong. He kept going. The contents of personal account ending in 7823, totaling $3.2 million. To Maria Elena Rodriguez. I couldn't breathe. The jewelry collection, including the Harrington diamond necklace, valued at approximately $800,000. To Maria Elena Rodriguez. The room started spinning. I looked at Mr. Reynolds. His expression was calm, professional. "This can't be real," I whispered. "It is," he said. "Mrs. Harrington made these changes a month before she passed. Everything was witnessed, notarized, and legally binding. Andrew and Margaret will receive portions of the commercial properties and stock holdings. But the estate, the cash, and the personal items, those go to you." I couldn't speak. I just sat there staring at him, waiting for someone to jump out and tell me it was a joke. But no one did. Mr. Reynolds reached into the folder and pulled out an envelope. "This is for you," he said, "from Mrs. Harrington." I took it with trembling hands. Inside was a letter, handwritten in her elegant script. I read it right there, tears blurring the words. She wrote, "Maria, by the time you read this, I'll be gone. I want you to know that you gave me something my own children never did. You saw me. You cared for me. You made my last years bearable. This is not charity. This is gratitude. You deserve every bit of this. Live the life you always dreamed of. Build something beautiful. And don't let them take it from you. With all my love, Eleanor." I sat in that conference room and sobbed. Mr. Reynolds handed me a box of tissues and waited patiently. When I finally pulled myself together, I asked him what happens now. He said the will goes through probate, that Andrew and Margaret would likely contest it, but that Mrs. Harrington had anticipated that. She'd left detailed documentation, recordings of her explaining her decisions, psychiatric evaluations proving she was of sound mind. It would hold up in court. I left his office in a daze. I walked to my car, sat behind the wheel, and stared at the letter in my hands. My whole life had just changed. The war started 3 days later. I was in the kitchen making coffee when I heard the pounding. Loud, aggressive, the kind of knock that demands attention. I opened the door and Andrew pushed past me without a word, his face red with rage. "Where is it?" he shouted. "Where's the paperwork?" I stepped back, my heart racing. He stormed through the rooms, opening drawers, checking cabinets, like he was searching for evidence of a crime. "You manipulated her," he said, spinning around to face me. "You isolated her from her family, filled her head with lies. My mother would never do this. She wasn't herself." I tried to speak, but my voice caught. I just stood there, watching him destroy the peace of the home I'd cared for. Margaret arrived an hour later with her attorney in tow, a thin man in an expensive suit who looked at me like I was dirt on his shoe. Margaret's voice was ice. "This won't stand," she said. "We'll prove you coerced her, that she wasn't in her right mind. Elder abuse is a serious crime, Maria. You could go to prison." The word prison hit me like a punch. I felt dizzy. I thought about my mother back home, about how I'd have to explain this to her, about losing everything I'd worked for. Vanessa arrived last, her voice shrill and piercing. "That necklace belonged to my husband's grandmother," she said, pointing a manicured finger at me. "You have no right to it. You're a thief, a common thief." The three of them stood there in the foyer, a united front of rage and entitlement, throwing accusations like daggers. I didn't say a word. I knew anything I said would be twisted, used against me. So I just listened, my hands shaking at my sides. When they finally ran out of steam, I pulled out my phone and called Mr. Reynolds. He arrived within the hour with 2 security guards. He was calm, professional, his voice steady as he informed them they were trespassing on private property. They protested, threatened, but the guards escorted them out one by one. As Margaret reached the door, she turned back, her eyes cold and full of hate. "You haven't won yet," she hissed. "This is just the beginning." She was right. The next few months were hell. They filed lawsuit after lawsuit. They hired private investigators to dig up dirt on me. They spread rumors that I was an illegal immigrant, that I'd stolen from Mrs. Harrington, that I'd forged documents. They dragged my name through the mud. I had reporters showing up at the estate, asking invasive questions. I had people from church who suddenly didn't recognize me anymore. I wanted to give up. I wanted to walk away, but then I'd remember Mrs. Eleanor's letter. "Don't let them take it from you." So I didn't. Mr. Reynolds was relentless. The first hearing was brutal. I sat at a long wooden table, hands folded in my lap, trying to stay calm while Andrew and Margaret's legal team painted me as a monster. Their lead attorney, a woman with sharp eyes and sharper words, paced in front of the judge. She called me a predator, someone who'd wormed her way into a vulnerable woman's life for financial gain. She showed photos of me and Mrs. Eleanor having tea, twisted them into evidence of manipulation. She questioned my immigration status, implied I was illegal, suggested I'd used Mrs. Eleanor to secure my future in this country. Every word felt like a slap. I wanted to stand up and scream the truth, tell them about the nights I stayed awake because Mrs. Eleanor couldn't sleep, about the meals I prepared when she could barely eat, about the conversations that meant everything to her because her own family couldn't be bothered. But I just sat there, tears streaming down my face while they tried to destroy me. Then it was our turn. Mr. Reynolds stood slowly, almost casually, and approached the judge's bench. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He presented the recordings first. Mrs. Eleanor's voice filled the courtroom, clear and strong despite her illness. "I am of sound mind and body," she said. "I am making these decisions freely, without coercion or pressure. Maria has been more of a daughter to me than my own children. She deserves this inheritance because she earned it through kindness, not blood." The courtroom went silent. You could hear people shifting in their seats. Margaret's face went pale. Andrew stared at the floor. Mr. Reynolds continued, presenting psychiatric evaluations from 2 independent doctors who'd examined Mrs. Eleanor in the weeks before she died. Both confirmed she was lucid, articulate, and fully capable of making her own decisions. He called Mrs. Callahan to the stand. She was nervous, her hands twisting in her lap, but she told the truth. She testified that Mrs. Eleanor had been clear about her wishes, that she'd spoken often about how much I meant to her, that she'd been frustrated with her children's neglect. When the other side tried to discredit her, she snapped. "I worked in that house for 30 years, she said. "I know the difference between manipulation and genuine care." Maria gave Mrs. Harrington something her own family never did: respect. I walked out of that courthouse a free woman and a millionaire. The late afternoon sun hit my face, and for the first time in months, I could breathe. Mr. Reynolds walked beside me, carrying his briefcase like we'd just finished any other meeting. "You did well," he said. "She would be proud." I nodded, unable to speak, but the money wasn't what mattered most. Over the next few weeks, I started to understand the true weight of Mrs. Eleanor's gift. It wasn't just the mansion or the bank account. It was freedom. For the first time in my life, I didn't have to worry about rent, about sending money home, about losing my job. I could breathe, I could dream. I transformed part of the mansion into a community center for immigrant women. I called it Eleanor's House. It offers free English classes, legal aid, job training, and temporary housing. The first group of women arrived on a cold Tuesday morning. I greeted them at the door, saw the fear and hope in their eyes, and recognized myself 15 years ago. I told them, "You're safe here. You're seen here." Some of them cried. So did I. Andrew and Margaret tried one last time to contest the will, but their appeal was thrown out within weeks. After that, they disappeared from my life completely. The perfect family had finally cracked. I visit Mrs. Eleanor's grave every Sunday. I bring fresh flowers and sit on the grass beside her, telling her about the women at Eleanor's house, about the lives being changed. Sometimes I say, "Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for teaching me that family isn't about blood. It's about who shows up." So here's my question for you. Do you think Mrs. Eleanor did the right thing? Should I have refused the inheritance? Let me know what you think in the comments. And if you're not subscribed yet, please do, because I have more stories to share, and trust me, you won't want to miss them. Sometimes the greatest families aren't the ones you're born into. They're the ones who choose you.